Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. You already know that abortion is going to be the big political rhetorical distraction from the Democrats. But there's also another issue that both parties have in their hip pocket, another issue that both parties support fully, though for very different reasons and in very different ways. And that's immigration, specifically illegal immigration. Both of the major parties want more immigrants, not less, and don't let the GOP fool you with their rhetoric. They don't want illegal immigration to stop because their white corporate donors depend on it. In fact, many of these GOP politicians themselves also benefit from illegal immigration. I covered for you how the newly elected Republican governor of Louisiana was himself involved in a business deal for a state construction contract that brought people to the U.S. illegally. So both political parties hire and protect illegal aliens, no matter what they may say in front of the cameras. From their nannies to the guys who they hire to work cheap on construction projects so they can pocket most of the money, no matter what they tell you, nobody's trying to actually stop it. They can do all the asinine bus trips to Martha's Vineyard they want. That's just PR stunts. The GOP wants some quickie headlines, and then they can tell their very base voters that they did something. And for those racist rubes, that's usually all it takes. Low IQ voters don't have high standards. And that's just the attitude of the politicians. When it comes to these corporations and businesses, the attitude is even worse. At the local level, it's done through restaurants and landscapers. At the county level, it's construction companies and contractors. And at the state and national levels, it's these big agribusinesses, from farms to the big food companies like Tyson. Even Walmart regularly gets caught with illegal aliens working for them. Now, people have been talking a lot about the wall, talking about it nonstop, and that's because they've been conditioned to by the white media. Now, it is true that there's a lot of people who break into the country by sneaking across the southern border. You got these migrant caravans from Central America. All of that is true, and it's certainly part of the problem. But it's more true that the majority of illegal aliens were allowed into the country legally, and then they overstayed their visas. I spent time in one of the border states. You get people who lie and wait however long they have to get a visa, and then once they get into the U.S., they go and live with some relatives or friends. There's entire networks of people who are helping to hide their cousins or buddies or relatives or what have you from whatever country they came in from. If the Republican Party were actually serious about stopping illegal aliens and not just talking about it, then they would go after the employers, the landlords, and the banking institutions who attract illegals here and who make it possible for them to have total access to all the basic economic necessities that normally are only for citizens or for people who are here legally. The banks are allowed to do unrestricted business for illegal aliens with no questions asked. Wells Fargo makes millions of dollars every day off of wire transfer fees. And it's this way because the banks lobbied for it. They wanted it this way. As long as employers know that they can hire illegals freely, and even if by some miracle there's a raid, nothing's going to happen to the unscrupulous employer who hired them, as long as they know that all they have to do is just go down to Home Depot or wherever else they found them before and get some more illegal labor, as long as the landlords know that they can rent and give leases to people who they know are in the country illegally, as long as banks can enjoy money from people who don't have to prove that they're in the country legally, as long as the people who solicit the illegals to come to the U.S. and make big money off of them do it completely with no consequences, then they will continue to look at their criminality as being a victimless crime. The key to stopping illegal immigration is to punish the businesses who are fueling it. Nobody's talking about that. The GOP loves to use distractions like critical race theory and other culture war issues to take attention off of what it is that their racist donors don't want touched. And the profits that they make off of illegal immigration is a huge part of that. You have never seen a single DA or U.S. attorney or state attorney general going on a crusade to lock up these so-called businesses who make their money off illegal immigration, and they're not going to. Learn to recognize the difference between someone who actually wants to change policy and someone else who's just trying to bluff their way past you. If they were serious, they'd be passing laws, lots of them, and then rounding people up. Neither of those things is happening, so there's a real economic and political driver behind the refusal to stop the illegal immigration from happening. But there's also another factor. You've probably heard about Japan's falling population. It fell by 800,000 people last year alone. China's declining population is also falling. You'll recall that many years ago in my now classic video Blackface in White and Yellow, I talked about anti-black racism in China and how China had been getting its hooks into Africa in order to save itself. One of the things I pointed out was that China's population was going to go through a series of population crashes, plural. I made that video something like 12 years ago at least. At the time, every single one of the headlines were about China's growing dominance and how nothing could stop it. I pointed out that their economy and their population numbers were unstable and unsustainable. People wanted to argue with me about that, of course, but I didn't bother to argue at all. I prefer to let reality do the talking for me, because it always gets the last word. China's population is dropping, as is the European Union's. There's estimates that by 2050, Europe's population will fall by 8%. There's a lot of countries whose populations are in decline. The white media often reports on those, but there's one country whose predicted population decline they don't talk about: the United States. The Census Bureau has reported that if all things remain equal, the U.S. population will peak by about the year 2080, and by the end of this century, it will have declined to 366 million. Now, they say the only way to sustain the U.S.'s population numbers is to make sure that there's a steady flow of immigrants constantly. They don't say exactly what is bad about the population dropping, though. Something else to consider, and it dovetails with yesterday's briefing. Part of the reason the government isn't trying to build more houses or to ease zoning restrictions is because a lot of the houses today are owned by baby boomers. The boomers are beginning to die out. As they continue to do so over the course of the next 20 years or so, all of those houses will start to become available again. The government doesn't actually want more houses to be built because then there will be a surplus of houses on the market, and that means the value of the homes, and hence the profitability of the real estate sector, will decrease. Houses are no longer a place to live anymore. They're an asset now, and a crucial part of keeping the nation's economic bubble inflated. So, as the government sees it, the only way to maintain the property values is to make sure that the national inventory of houses remains tight. They want people to have to compete to buy houses, to keep those prices high. But with a falling population, the prices will have to drop. Unless they can create artificial demand. Now, nobody can tell me what exactly the big emergency is. So what if the U.S. population drops? Cities are overcrowded, roads and infrastructures are crumbling, all the major industries from energy to farming are stretched beyond their limits. They can barely sustain the number of people we have now. What possible advantage could there be in having more mouths to feed? The response from the government is something the labor force. And what does that mean? The U.S. isn't the world's largest labor force today, China is. So is the U.S. economy broken because of that? Of course not. So why exactly do they think a lower population is a bad thing? Because someone needs to be here to take care of the elderly, they say? That's what nursing homes are for. And as they become a growth industry, you'll see the price for nursing homes go up, and more people gravitate to work there. So the olders are going to be taken care of, those who have insurance, that is. At least from an economic standpoint, it seems the real reason for immigration mania among the elites is because they want to make sure the peak level of economic activity is maintained no matter what. It's the reason that you had Officer Eric Adams of the NYPD giving away the game in New York. Bring all those workers back downtown. You need to come back downtown. We can't have you working remotely. Why not? Productivity has gone up, not down. Well, we need you guys to come back downtown because the businesses rely on you for revenue, and the city relies on you for parking fees and other hidden taxes. That's the real reason that Eric Adams wants people to come back to the office. These corporations and governments are used to making a certain amount of money off of the people, and they are determined that that level of revenue is not going to go down at all. But the most important reason that neither party will do anything about illegal immigration is because they see it as being a political solution to a problem. Before I get to that, on a side note, I know that some of you have been beside yourselves with grief about the latest war in the Middle East. You think that I and others of the new voices of black media are missing the big picture because we don't see ourselves as being in solidarity with the Palestinians. Now, as the black media, we've explained repeatedly that no matter how much hype the white media gives to this, we don't have a dog in this fight. Neither of the parties over there at war have done us any favors, and when they immigrate to the U.S., they both are totally racist towards black people, so there's no side for us to take. You may want to engage in mental gymnastics because the white media hypes this up and you feel like you gotta do something, pretend that you're able to identify with someone, but they don't see you that same way. The fight over there is not our fight. And if it makes you feel a little bit better, there's going to be some sort of ceasefire or some other cessation of hostilities over there eventually, so please don't worry. But even with the fighting and killing going on, do you see anyone trying to make any alliances with us? You have phony people of color allies who want to tell us that we're not doing enough to stop the Israelis' apartheid regime. And on the other hand, you got people like Michael Rappaport who says that if the hostages in Israel were black, nobody would be talking about a ceasefire. They'd be demanding that those people be gotten out of there yesterday. I guess this idiot doesn't know that black people are the main ones killed and incarcerated in this country and nobody says boo about it, so the joke's on him. And I'm sure that this goofball also would think that black people aren't doing enough to support Israel. Black people have done more than enough. Walter White, who was leader of the NAACP, was the one who helped negotiate and persuade the African countries to vote to recognize Israel in the UN back in 1948. And Ralph Bunche won the Nobel Peace Prize for his work to negotiate an end to the first war that broke out in Israel when the Arabs made it clear that they weren't going to recognize the state. So black people have done more than enough to support Israel, more than anyone else. The question is, when's the Israeli government going to reciprocate? There have been Israeli officials, however, who have called black people the biggest problem for Israel. Now notice that whenever people talk to us, it's never with respect. Nobody ever comes to us and offers us anything for our support. It's always lectures and insults and cheap attempts to shame us and telling us we should do it because something Dr. King. And some of the very people who want to wag their fingers at us were actually instrumental in undermining the civil rights movement. If you want someone to stick their neck out for you, then you can't show up empty-handed. As the white powers that be see it, immigration and the so-called browning of America is fine, as long as the economic status quo is maintained. When these white supremacists on the left or the right say immigrants, what they mean is buffer group. That's what the word means to them. Every time they use the word immigrant or immigration, that means buffer group. That's how immigration has worked in America in political terms since at least the 19th century with the Irish immigrants. Someone who the dominant society can point to and say, see, they disagree with black people, so you can't blame anything on us. It's meant to be a political shield to hide behind. When Biden said that black people better learn to cooperate with Hispanics because they're the second largest demographic in the country now, I wonder when, at any time of the last 50 years previous, did he ever tell Hispanics they better learn to cooperate with black people because we outnumbered them? Immigration is seen by these white supremacists as being a political tool to insulate themselves from the pressure that we put on them. This is what they have in mind: dilute our political voice and replace it with people who aren't trying to fight white supremacy because they believe they're part of it. This is why we're not putting on the cape for anyone. Our days of virtue signaling by trying to be the spokesman for everyone else's plight, our days of trying to put together coalitions, is over. Immigration wasn't what built this country. Black labor and ingenuity did. Immigrants weren't the ones who created and established what little morality and decency this country has. Black people did all of that. Every good and honorable thing about this country, what little there is, wasn't done by its founders or by immigrants. It was solely the work of black people, specifically black people who came out of slavery in this country. We were and continue to be the only ones fighting to turn this white supremacist hellhole into something resembling a civilized nation. And we don't want to hear anything about how the country needs more people from abroad. What should be happening is for the country to finally listen to what we need and then to act on it. When black people's needs are tended to, the country improves. Attempting to do anything else, well, that's a tactic that doesn't have a future. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Bobby Williams, Jerome Webb, Matthew Woods, LB, and Sherwin Wilcox. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.